One of the most interesting of all of the things that we have in the Bible are the miracles of Jesus. One of the most misunderstood things in the Bible and in today's world are the miracles of Jesus. Today I want to just talk, I guess you'd say, in an instructive kind of way. I remember when I was in college, Brother Baxter taught us a course in the preparation of delivery of sermons. And he said you need to keep your sermons varied. Sometime a sermon of exhortation, sometime a sermon on first principles, sometime a sermon of encouragement, sometime a sermon on the Christian life. And he says, don't forget the sermons that are instructive. So today is an instructive sermon. I want you to think today as we go along about a comparison. A comparison with what the Bible how the Bible shows us the miracles of Christ. And contrast that with the old pagan mythologies and the Rome, and Greece. And compare it also with the claims of miracles today and the idea and attitude that people have toward this whole thing of miracles today. In John chapter 3 and verse 2, the miracles of Christ are authenticated by the statement of a man who was an inquirer. Nicodemus came to Jesus and said, "We know that you're a teacher from God." "How do you know that, Nicodemus?" He said, "Because no one could do the works that you do unless God were with him." Well, that really was an authentication from this man Nicodemus about the whole thing of what was the purpose of the miracles. The purpose of the miracles was to authenticate the validity of the message and the person of Jesus Christ. The miracles and these things this mission, they went together. So we have in Mark chapter 1 and verse 22, we have him talking about his teaching, and it was right in the midst of miracles that he was doing. In verse 27, he talks about the miracles. And so the miracles of Christ went along with the teachings of Christ. I think it's very important that we stop and realize that. It was a part of his ministry, a ministry of miracles. This brings up the question, what in the world is a miracle anyway? Not from the point of view of contemporary ideas, but from the biblical point of view, what is a miracle? Well, first of all, a miracle is not just a wonderful, wonderful happening. Miracles are wonderful, but there are a lot of wonderful things that are not miracles. I hear so many times people talk about the miracle of birth. Well, that's a wonderful thing. Folks, that's not a miracle. It goes right along the natural process of things. Miracles are supernatural. They're outside of the realm of the natural. For example, if a person comes in to our midst here, and his arm has been cut off, and he's carrying his right arm in his left hand, and he says, "Can somebody attach this?" And so one of us says, "Yes, I can do that." And there it is. It's attached. That's a miracle, folks. If somebody says, "I'll get a doctor," and he sews it up and puts it all back together, and in 6 weeks or 2 or 3 months or whatever it might be, it's grown back. That's not a miracle. A miracle, instead, is something that happens outside of the realm of natural things. Now, we might think that things are beautiful, wonderful, and in the popular sense of the word, the miracle of birth. Yes, it may be wonderful, but let's remember that the miracles of Christ defied the laws of nature. The miracles of Christ violated, if you want to look at it that way, violated the laws of nature. We'll see how these things come along in just a moment. The Bible idea of miracles then is not necessarily the contemporary idea of miracles. I want us to look at the nature of some of the miracles in the Bible. First of all, people say sometimes, I don't believe in miracles. I don't believe in miracles at all. I don't believe Jesus worked miracles. I don't believe the apostles worked miracles. I don't believe in the miracles of the Bible. Well, let me ask you, do you believe in God? If you say, well, yes, I believe in God, but I don't believe in the miracles. If you believe in God, you automatically believe in miracles. Because He is a supernatural being. He is a being with supernatural power. Now, how He wants to manifest this power is really not for me to say or for you to say. It's for Him to say. Does God use all of His power today? The answer is no. No, He doesn't. He uses some of His power. If God so desired, God could destroy this building right now. He's not doing that. God could destroy the world right now. He's not doing that. There are certain things in the power of God that He doesn't use. Now, does He have the right to use them? Yes, He has the right to do anything God wants to do. So if someone is sick, and God wants to heal that person outside of the realm of medicine and things like that, that's God's business. But for me to come along and say, such and such a thing was a miracle, well, how was it a miracle? Well, because he took this medicine and he went to the doctors and so forth. They said that he was, there was nothing else that they could do, but he did get well. Well, there was a time when nobody knew anything about germs. And then the first thing you know, they began to discover our ailments come from these little bitty bugs. Now the whole idea of the treatment of disease changed. And things that were not understood before are now understood in reference to bacteria. How many more things are there for scientists and medical doctors to discover? They discover them all the time, don't they? So, I'm just saying, let's be sure that we understand what biblical miracles, what the characteristic of biblical miracles were, before we begin saying that such and such a thing is a miracle in the biblical sense of the word. Jesus, as I said in the very beginning, Jesus linked His own mission to miracles. He said on one occasion, I can't imagine the frustration that was present with this. They didn't believe, they saw these miracles, they saw these signs in John chapter 10, and they still didn't believe Him. And Jesus says, if you don't believe me for what I say, believe me for my work's sake. John 10, believe me for my work's sake. John 14 is very much like that. You see, when people don't want to believe, it's very difficult to get them to believe, even in the face of supernatural acts. A little bit more about that as we go along. What words does the Bible use for miracles? Well, there are a number of Greek words that are used here that are pretty interesting. One is a word that we get dynamite from, dunamis, or dynamo. It means a power, a strong power. The gospel is the dunamis, the power of God to save. Same word. Sometimes it's used in reference to normal natural powers. Sometimes it's used in reference to supernatural powers. God has power, dunamis. But so do people have power, dunamis. So this word is used in two different realms. There's another word, it's marvel. It's translated as a marvelous work, a marvel. This is usually something that you see or touch or feel with your hands. It's sensitive. And so the miracles sometime in the Bible are spoken of in this way. There's another word that John uses a great deal, and the other writers use it also, but John is the one who really uses it, semeion. And it means a sign. A sign. It is an act that signifies the validity of the things that Jesus was claiming for himself. And so it speaks of many signs and wonders or marvelous acts that Jesus did. Well, you know, what are the things in contemporary, just our own society? People become so enthralled with the idea of miracles that they forget about the sign. The miracle was a sign. I've got a favorite way to illustrate this. Here I'm an artist, let's say. Believe me, I'm not. I don't know how to draw a straight line with a ruler. But I'm not an artist. But let's just say that I was an artist. And I'm driving my car on a dark night, and my headlights show a sign up there. I said, wow, boy, that's a beautiful sign. And I stop my car. And I go over and look at that sign and said, the lettering is so beautiful. It's so artistic, the way this sign is laid out. It's beautiful. I don't know who made this sign, but boy, this is one of the finest signs I've ever seen in my life. I'm just so glad that I saw this sign. I get back in my car and I drive about 30 feet down and go over a cliff. The sign said, cliff, 30 feet ahead. I was so involved in the beauty of the sign, I didn't look to see what the sign was telling me. And this is a significant part of the miracles of Christ. John speaks of these, Jesus speaks of these. These are signs. They give a message. They say, I am who I claim to be. I am what I claim to be. These are signs from God. And this is the word that is used most frequently in reference to the miracles. And then another interesting thing I think about the miracles of Christ is what he had power over. Now, we don't run into this just a whole lot in contemporary things. It's kind of, I'll say it's kind of funny to look at Greek mythology, because in the Greek myths, the gods had all kinds of power over a wide variety of things, but they didn't have power over other gods sometime. And sometime one of the gods would kill one of the other gods. And we have some of this in the mythology that comes out of the Middle East, for example. You see, there's such a big contrast here in reference to these things compared with what the miracles of Christ. So I have 4 things down here that are areas in which Jesus worked his miracles. One is his power over nature. Now I want you to make comparisons here between Jesus and his power and his miracles compared with contemporary things and compared with the mythologies of Greek and Rome. Power over nature. He walked on the water. He said to the storm, peace, be still. And the storm ceased. He had power over nature. We don't see any of this in our present day. Then the second thing was he had power over disease. Now, I want us to notice that there's a difference here. Jesus spoke the word, and the disease was cured. A centurion came to Jesus, and Jesus said, I'll go to your house and heal your son. And the centurion said, Master, I'm a man who has people under my authority, and I say to this one, go, and he goes, and this, do this, and he does that. He says, you don't need to come to my house. Just say the word, and my servant will be healed. Well, Jesus said, you know, and this fellow was a Roman. He was a centurion, a Roman soldier. Jesus said, you know, I haven't found anybody in Israel that has this kind of faith. And so the man went home, and surely enough, his servant was healed. You see, there's a great difference in that and saying, pray for healing. Do you know that Jesus never had somebody come and say, Lord, I have this disease. Can you heal me? Jesus never did say, go home and pray. No, does God answer prayer? Yes, God answers prayer. Prayer is very complex, but prayer is very real. And the answers to prayer are very real. We're not talking about prayer. We're talking about miraculous things, the invasion of the natural by the supernatural. Well, Jesus healed diseases. Not only so, but Jesus also had power over the spiritual domain. He cast out demons. Now, there are some people who claim to cast out demons and all of this. There's kind of an interesting story over in the book of Acts. Paul was in Ephesus, and he had worked certain miracles, and there were a group of men there who were, we would call them exorcists. They tried to cast out demons from people. And so one of them said to a man who had demons, he says, I command you in the name of the God that Paul preaches, come out of him. And the demon spoke back to him and said, we know Paul, we know Jesus Christ. Who in the world are you? And the man jumped on the fellow and beat him up. It's kind of an interesting story that we find there in the book of Acts. But the point is this. Jesus had power over demons to command the demons to come out. They came out. Sometimes they even spoke to him. The one that gets me the most, Jesus had the power over death. He raised the dead. One day, Luke tells us that Jesus was in a little place called Nain. It's a very small village. And by the way, it's still there. It might not be exactly the same place, but there's still a little village called Nain. And as he was going through Nain, he saw a funeral procession, saw a group of people carrying a dead body to bury it. He stepped up and stopped them. And he raised this little boy from the dead, the son of the widow of Nain. Just there on the roadside, he raised him from the dead. You don't see that today. You don't see that being done. You don't even see it being tried. You remember at the grave of Lazarus? Jesus just simply said, Lazarus, come forth. And Lazarus came. The contrast that we see between the miracles of Christ and the miracles that are claimed today, that contrast is very, very great when we begin looking at the miracles of Christ themselves. There are some other things here that, in some ways, I guess we could say that this is maybe a little bit peripheral, but nevertheless, as a total, they turn out to be very important. Jesus' miracles were never advertised. He never did put up a sign saying, come and be healed. Miracles and teaching or something like this. Never did have that. Instead, people came to him because they saw or had seen or had heard of the wonderful things that he did. The miracles of Christ were done as he walked along. The raising of the little dead son of the widow of Nain. People would see him passing by, and they would shout to him, come and heal me. And he would step aside and heal them. When he was on his way, going through Jericho, on his way to Jerusalem, there was a man over on the side that he was blind, and he, what's going on? Jesus of Nazareth is coming. He had heard of Jesus of Nazareth. He says, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. And his friend said, well, I don't want to put it this way, shut up. They said, keep quiet, don't bother him. He's too important a fellow for you to bother. Now, they didn't say that, but that's kind of the way the story comes through to me, okay? But Jesus stepped aside and saw this man, and Jesus healed the man right there on the road going back to Jerusalem. You see, the miracles of Christ were not private. They were not advertised. They also were a part of the historical framework. Now, what I mean by that is this. If you look at mythology, and some myths are very interesting to read, aren't they? If you look at mythology, they happen in, well, sometime or another. We have no definition of when. They are not a part of history, not at all. They're a part of mythology. And nobody knows how far back that goes. Jesus' miracles were a part of his history. When the Gospels were written around AD 70, something like that, when the Gospels were written, there were people still alive who had witnessed the things of Christ. And so the miracles of Christ were a part of his history. The miracles of Christ were useful also. I just wrote down here, he didn't make any elephants fly. He didn't do things that were spectacular to make a big show. Oh, you remember in the temptations of Christ, the devil said, if you're the Son of God, climb up on the pinnacle of the temple and jump off. After all, the Old Testament said, he will bear you up on his hands. And imagine something here for just a moment. If I really want people to see my power, why don't I just climb up there and jump off, and everybody will stand there and, oh, here he comes just floating down. Didn't hurt him a bit. No, he didn't do things that were spectacular. His miracles were useful to people. The healing of the sick, the raising of the dead. He never did try to satisfy human curiosity in all of these things. Well, his miracles were performed not just in reference to healing a sick person, but they were performed in reference to a number of different areas, a number of different venues that he worked his miracles in. Today, the miracles that are claimed are almost entirely in reference to some kind of disease. Jesus' miracles were performed openly. Jesus' miracles were not in every case, but in almost every case, they were instantaneous. There's not but one case where this is accepted. And that's where Jesus healed a blind man, and at first he saw men that looked like trees walking. And then finally his sight was completely restored. Well, all of this took place in the same context. It wasn't 6 weeks later or something like that. The miracles of Jesus were gratuitous. He never asked for anything. He never expected anything. His miracles were not his means of support. I think one of the most important things is that the miracles of Christ came from a power that was resident in Christ. The power was in him. There's a story that I think is very important along this line. There was a woman, a whole crowd of people, and there was a woman there who had what was just simply called an issue of blood. She had a problem, and she thought to herself, if I can just touch him, I'll be healed. And she worked her way through the crowd, and she touched him, and she was healed. And Jesus said, hold it. Somebody touched me. And the apostle said, well, of course they are. They're all around you. He says, oh no, there's somebody touched me. And the woman, she saw she was caught. She spoke to him and said, I'm the one. Now the point is this, that in this whole thing of the miracles of Christ, there was no charge. There was not anything that Jesus expected from the people. And the power of this was not in the power of prayer. It was not in the power of their faith, although faith sometimes is mentioned. It was not in the power of their faith. It was in the power of Christ. And when he touched them, when he spoke, when he performed a miracle, the power was resident in him. There are a whole lot of other things that we could say about the miracles of Christ. People bring up this idea a lot of times about, well, what about faith? Didn't Jesus say, oh, he could not work very many miracles there because of their unbelief? Yes, he did. He said that. What does this tell us? Well, some people say, well, that just meant that these people didn't believe, and since they didn't believe, he couldn't work the miracle because the miracles depended on whether or not the people believed. No, that isn't. If you look at the whole context there, that isn't what's taught in this passage. What is taught in the passage? Well, the thing is this. Jesus told his apostles one time, he said, don't cast your pearls before swine. And by that he simply meant there are going to be some people, it's not going to do a bit of good in the world to try and teach them because they are so hard-hearted. So he says, basically says, don't waste your time sowing your seed in unfertile soil. Go where people will listen. And so Jesus said, the gospel writer said, Jesus could not work very many miracles there because of the people's unbelief. He was saying basically, I have only a short time to be with you. I'm going to use that time to the very best advantage. And if you are hard-hearted and you don't believe, then I'll go to where people are willing to accept this message. And this is the idea of faith and the miracles. Faith is necessary for salvation. But as we read the stories of the miracles of Christ, most of the time, faith was not even mentioned as an element of the miracle in any way. Well, what does this teach us? Folks, I think that it teaches us something that we need to really stop and think about, and that is that the wonderful, wonderful things that happen in this world, the beauty and the dynamism and all of these things, part of nature, part of the way things go, the miracles of Christ violated nature. That is to say, they were outside of the realm of nature. They invaded nature with supernature. And that's the way the miracles of Christ were. At the raising of Lazarus, those who did not believe, this is strange to me, but it's true. John chapter 11, verse 47, they were discussing this thing. Yes, Lazarus has been raised from the dead. Oh boy, that's a problem. After Lazarus, some of the people got together, the leaders of the Jews, and here's what they said. Here is this man performing many miraculous signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and then the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. You see, these people were not interested in Christ. They were interested in themselves. These people were not interested in seeing what message the sign had. They were interested instead in destroying the one who made the sign. And so I say to you today, the great contrast between the miracles of Christ and the things of mythology or the miracles that are claimed today. We don't see people walking on the water. We don't see people calming storms. We don't see people raising the dead or anything like that. And I'm appealing to you, let's try to stick with what the Bible actually says about the whole idea of miracles. What is a great miracle? Well, the greatest miracle that I can think of is the resurrection of Christ. He was crucified. 3 days he was in the tomb. And on the third day, he came forth. Oh, but wait. Maybe the greatest miracle, if we want to call it a miracle, the greatest thought, maybe we should say, that comes out of this is, he did that for me. Not because I was such a good guy. Not because I was such a profitable servant. He did that. As Paul says, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Not while we were yet good people, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And this resurrection is the grandest theme, the grandest miracle in all of creation. Why? Because he did it for you and me. If you're not a Christian, the best way you can say to God, thank you for the gift of Christ, the best way is to become a Christian, become his follower, be buried with him in baptism. And like Paul says, as Christ was raised from the dead, you also are to be raised to walk in newness of life. That's God's invitation. We invite you to come. Let's stand together and sing.